Thank you, Jill. Thank you. Thank you. It's so fun that this is actually happening. Hello. Just want to make sure you guys can hear me well. Can you hear me? Yes, thumbs up. Great. Yay. This is what we want. We want some audience participation. Nothing like having a Zoom speaker after lunch. That is going to be perfect. But I'm going to do my very best to keep you engaged and to help you move forward in your short-term mission and long-term mission practices. I do just want to say thank you to the Diocese of North Carolina for providing this opportunity. As Jill mentioned, I am a product of the Diocese of North Carolina. And so this is a treat to get to be able to speak back into the community that helped shape me in my youth and young adulthood. Anybody in the room remember when Brown Summit was Brown Summit? Yes, I love those hands. That was my generation of people, and what God did in us and through us during that time was incredible. So I'm really, really thrilled to get to be here with you. I want to appreciate what Bishop Todd had to say this morning. Bishop Todd and his wife and I get to work together in Education Equals Hope, which we'll hear a little bit more about in a bit. But we get to partner with him in the ministry in Madagascar. So that was really fun to hear him this morning and to have the history and the context of how missions has come to be in the Episcopal Church. I know some of you know this, but I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and I am the first Episcopal missionary that I ever met because I didn't know that we had them growing up. And since then, have met quite a few, including Bishop Todd and Patsy. So just really fun to hear that history. And he talked a lot about the importance of partnership and the making of disciples, all of which I couldn't agree with more. So my hope for you on this very fine Saturday is that after this keynote, you would walk out the door with some very practical, what is my next step? What do I do in mission? I'm going to speak from a short-term mission perspective, but all of these concepts can be easily adapted or fit into a long-term or mid-term missions paradigm. So while I'm going to concentrate on short-term mission, please don't feel like I'm putting you in a box. You and God can use this the way that you best see fit. I have two children upstairs, so every now and then I'm hearing sounds just to make sure that they are doing well. I have been on the field with SAMS, that same organization that reached out and helped Patsy and Todd in Madagascar. I've been with them for 25 years after 5 years of youth ministry in Upper South Carolina. And I have experienced the goodness of short-term mission domestically and internationally. I have seen miraculous things happen, and I have seen relationships change and grow that provide concrete forms of how God is meeting his people where they are and loving them. Also, I think any of you in that room and here on the field especially, there are also some bad examples of missions. There are also things that happen that are so challenging and detrimental. And so I applaud you for being here on a Saturday to learn more and increase your awareness of how all of this goes together, how to do missions well, because we don't want to cause more harm than good. And that is quite possible. And there's lots to dig into there, but we are first going to kind of step back and make sure that we're going to start at kind of the 30,000 foot view and then slowly zero in on good ways and good practices in mission. I love the title of this conference, that it takes the whole world to know the whole gospel. And I couldn't agree more, because God is working in every corner and every continent and every community and every house. God is working, and it just depends on us to see where and how, and what God is doing in and through you should inform how I understand how God is working and moving in and through me. And so I love that we are starting with that very global understanding and perspective. The first thing I want to talk about is timeline. So again, I really want to do nuts and bolts for you. Can you still see me? And can you see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so off we go to the races. Oh, I will just give you a little bit of context that where Ecuador is, as Bishop Todd described where Madagascar is. Here is Ecuador in this northwestern corner of South America. This is the city of Quito. It's over 2 million people. This is where I have been living and serving for the last 21 years. But the city of Quito is also tucked into the Andes Mountains. These two mountains are called Las Silenisas, and they're active volcanoes, but it's fine. They haven't erupted, and nor have the other ones since 1999. So we're doing well. But so there's a lot of rural and a lot of urban here in Ecuador. So that gives you just a little sense of where I am. Now let's talk about the process of short-term mission. There are 3 phases to short-term and or long-term mission. And not surprisingly, they are the pre-field, the on-field, and the post-field. Now, if you are going to do missions well, you need to not only be aware that these 3 different fields exist, but you need to know what happens and what to do in each one of these fields. You might notice that I am trying very diligently not to say the word trip. I'm not talking about short-term mission trips, because trips have, the word trip has 2 connotations that I want to avoid in missions. The first connotation of the word trip is that it's all about me. It's all about my trip to grandma's house, or my trip to the beach, or my trip to the mountains. A trip is about many more people than just the people with the suitcases. And we're going to dig into that. The other reason that I try to avoid the word trip, and a lot of people in the mission community do as well, is because we want to be really clear that a trip has a beginning and an end. And if short-term mission is done well, yes, it has a start date, but there should be no ending date. God's mission in the world had a start date, whether you want to say that start date was creation or that start date was with Jesus. There was a starting point in time, but we are still going on into perpetuity. If you do short-term mission, if you do mission well, God is going to be working in you and through you in that process, but there is no specific end date, which is actually good news. It takes the pressure off of us of having to have a due date, but it also should instill us with the great desire to work well and long and hard in all of this. At the end, there will have been asked and will abide by making sure that we have question and answer time. If you have a pressing question in the midst of what I'm talking about, don't be afraid to raise your hand and wave it vigorously so Adam can see you. And I'd love to address that in a moment, but we will also have time at the end. And I would like to say hello to all of my dear peeps in the room who I know and love very well. Hi, guys. Okay, so here we are, process of short-term mission. There's the pre-field, the on-field, and the post-field. Now, we're going to take even one more step back before we begin this looking at what happens in these different time frames. And that, of course, is why. Why would you go on missions? Why would you get involved in the pre-field or the on-field or the post-field? And I've brainstormed these 4 reasons, but I want to drill down on 2 of them, actually on all of them. But the whole asking the why before is very important. Sometimes people go on short-term mission because their faith is so full and so alive that they can't help but pour it out to others. It's like they have found the most delicious flavor of chocolate chip ice cream, and it is the best thing on the planet. And if they weren't to share that with the people around them that they know love chocolate, they're just kind of jerks, right? It's like that. I have this and I really want to share it because this is what God is doing in me. So that outpouring of an abundant faith. Short-term mission is also an opportunity to explore faith. I can't tell you, I'm going to make up some statistics here, but I would say well over half of the people that I've worked with over the last 21, 26 years in short-term mission, they weren't doing short-term mission out of an abundance of faith. They were doing short-term missions out of curiosity of what is faith. And the amazing thing is that God meets us in that. Whatever your driving force is, God is going to meet you in that. So the opportunity to explore faith. I was in youth ministry for 5 years in the Diocese of Upper South Carolina before God called me into full-time missions here in Ecuador. And here in Ecuador, continue to do youth ministry as well. And in youth ministry, we know that a weekend retreat is going to impact a young person's life exponentially more profoundly than a year of Sunday school classes. That experiential living it out. So in short-term missions, it's another experience of living it out. Now, what we need to be very careful of is that while we are living out not even living it out, while we are being curious and investigating our own faith and what we do and how we do it, and is God someone I can trust, and can I grow deeper in my faith? It is completely fine to do that through short-term mission, as long as the leadership knows that that is what is happening. Does that make sense? Sometimes no thought has been given to this question at all, and you will have a mix of people on your short-term team, some of whom are living a mature faith and acting in obedience, one of the 5 words that Bishop Todd talked about in Matthew 28 this morning. They're living out the obedience to go and to make disciples. And other people, they have no idea if they're ready to make a disciple. They're not even sure if they're a disciple. And they are looking for a place to explore their faith. Again, both of those things are good and welcomed as long as the leadership of that mission, and this would probably no one who's investigating their faith is going to sign up for long-term missions. This is probably a short-term phenomenon, that they know what they're dealing with and who's in the room. I hope that makes sense, because you're going to tailor, or whoever you're going to serve with, whether that's in the same town that you live or in the next state or internationally, whatever that mission opportunity is, everyone needs to be aware of who is the audience that is coming to serve. The third thing, obviously, it is an avenue for social justice. We have had many people come down on short-term teams with us that they don't really necessarily care what God is doing in them or through them. They just know it is the right thing to care for orphans or street children or women coming out of prostitution and sex trafficking. That's just the right thing to do. And in the course of doing it, then they discover how God is working through them, and God is working therefore in them as well. And as Jill and I had a chance to talk about earlier this summer, that if short-term mission is done well, there is always an aspect of pilgrimage. You can have pilgrimage without short-term mission. And by that, I mean, you can walk the Camino de Santiago. You can walk from Iona to Lindisfarne in Scotland. You can create your own pilgrimage to the National Cathedral, and together you are seeking the divine. If you go on short-term mission and your goal is to serve students in desperate and difficult places, if you are doing that through your faith, that always has an aspect of pilgrimage and should always be honored as such. Make sense so far? I don't see any hands waving wildly yet. Okay, so this is really what I'm excited to share with you today in this very, very simple grid called the MISTM grid. It is short for the maximum impact short-term mission. And this is developed by a guy named Roger Peterson and Wayne Sneed and some other people. Their names are on one of the slides up here. But this has to do with those three areas, or those three timelines that we just talked about, that the pre-field, the on-field, and the post-field, which is across the x-axis there. And then I'll hit the y-axis in a second. But let's just make sure that we're all on the same page where these different sections begin, and then this pre-field and on-field and post-field. And I'm going to give myself a little marker here. So over here in pre-field, this is obviously what is happening before you start the mission, before you get in the van to drive across town or go to the airport to fly to another country. So that is the time from when someone said, hey, we should go do this. And it's all the prep phase. Now, preparation is very important. Guys, you're probably going to have to take notes on this. You've probably never heard this before, she said sarcastically, that if you study, you do better on the test. If you go to practice, you do better in the game. The same concept obviously applies in missions. And the pre-field is knowing where you're going and what you're doing, and preferably the why behind it, all of the context. I have picked up people at the airport in Ecuador, and they've asked, what language do you speak here? Really? You got on a plane and came down here? And you don't know what language we speak? I have also been asked, where are the giraffes? Correct hemisphere. One more continent over. You're almost there. Those are silly and ridiculous and somewhat embarrassing examples. But also the pre-field is, we're supposed to do English tutoring? Oh, yeah, we didn't really get a chance to get anything together. Isn't that why you're here? Why would you show up unprepared? Does anyone else have those stress dreams, like where you're supposed to like show up and take a test and you didn't even know you were registered for the class? I mean, that sort of like, this is what you're coming for. So to be prepared, who are you going to interact with? What do you need to bring with you to do that successfully? Doing all of that but I'm also getting ahead of myself. So anyway, that pre-field is just that prior. The on-field is the specific time that you are doing the ministry. If you're international, it's from the time you take off from the airport to the time you land in your home airport. Domestically, it's while you're in relationship engaged with what the ministry is you're doing. That's on-field. On-field has generally gotten almost all of the play in short-term missions. And so it seems very confident and obvious, but we need to define the on-field so that we can define the pre-field, and then more importantly, define the post-field. So the post-field obviously is whenever you get home from whatever it is that you've done onto, and like that arrow was, into perpetuity. I've put a nice little box around it because it's easier to understand that way. But the post-field is immediately following. It's the day after the short-term mission. It's a week after. It's a month after. It's 6 months after. It's a year after. It's 5 years after. It's 10 years after. It is the post field. I had the incredible opportunity to study at Swanee, the University of the South, Swanee, Tennessee. Woo! Shirley and a group of Episcopalians, someone's been to Swanee. And with Dixon Myers, the head of outreach, my very first short-term mission ever was to Jamaica. We went to Kingston and we worked in a garbage dump. It was the first time that I was ever aware that people live in garbage dumps. I didn't know that there were so many children living in this garbage dump that the government actually came in and built a school on compacted garbage, because that's how many kids there were living in refuse. I tell you that because what God did in me during that time has a lot to do with why I'm zooming in from Quito, Ecuador. So I'm still living my post field from that short-term mission experience in in the mid-90s. And so that's where the post field, it can go on for so long. And that's, again, great because there's less pressure, but it's also really important to recognize and know. And I'm living multiple post fields, right? Like not just that time, but the hundreds of teams that I've been involved with, I'm still living in those post fields as well. So that's our x-axis. Now let's look at our y-axis. The first group is the senders. There are senders, there are goers, and there are host receivers. The senders are those of you who are sending out the missions. It could be your mission committee or your global mission board. It could be, it should be the whole church. It's friends, it's family. And in fact, we're going to divide that into two in a little bit, but we're going to start with just the idea of the senders. And there are jobs for the senders to do in pre-field, and there are jobs for the senders to do while the team is on field. And there are jobs for the senders to do post-field. Next down are the goers. Those are the people with the suitcases, right? Those are the people who are actually going to go. As Bishop Todd talked about this morning, how important it is to meet people where they are. So going, there are jobs for people, the goers in the pre-field. There are jobs for goers in the on-field, and there are jobs for goers in the post-field. Post receivers, that's where those are the people that you are going to serve and to serve with. And you can see that it's not just senders, goers, receivers, as though they're just receiving. They are also the hosts. Like any party needs a host. They need to know who, when people come, they need, who's in charge here, whose space, whose territory is this, whose culture is dominant, who has the answers to the questions of why the toilet paper is kept outside the bathroom and not inside the stalls. It's just a cultural conundrum that I still have. But so those are the host receivers. They do receive the team, but not in a subservient sort of way, but in we are your hosts sort of way. Now, for short-term mission to be done well, all three of these, the senders, goers, and host receivers, all have to be involved in all 9 aspects of all of this planning. When I say 9, I mean those 9 empty boxes that make up this MISTM grid. So again, there are jobs for the host receivers pre-field. There are jobs for the host receivers on field and their jobs for the host receivers post field. We want short-term mission and mission in general. We want it to be as beneficial for every person that is a part of this. It should be of positive benefit, not just for the host receivers, or not just for the goers, or not just for the senders, but for all of those. And I'm actually going to take us to the next slide. Now you'll see the different divisions within each of the senders, goers, and host receivers. Just drilling down a little bit more so you know specifically who you're dealing with. So the senders, that can be the church. It should be the church. And it is also family and friends, because the family member of someone going on a short-term mission is going to have a different job as a sender than the church itself as a sender. And in a few minutes, I'm going to brainstorm some of the ideas in these different categories. But more than anything, really want you to sit with your team and brainstorm those categories. The goers, there are the leaders, the team leaders, and there are the team members. And the host receivers are the ministry site and the agencies. I'm going to let you turn to your neighbor at your table for just a second and discuss with them the difference between all of these different places. All these different people. Okay, I'm going to call you back. So the goers, the leaders, and the team members, two different leadership and fellowship are also very, very important in missions, to know your role and know what you're supposed to do in that. And then on the bottom, the host receiver ministry sites. Those would be the churches or the ministries or the populations that you have gone to serve. But hopefully you're working with a long-term agency. Something like Education Equals Hope, for example, or Episcopal Relief and Development. That there's some sort of agency that has a long-term relationship that you are working with and towards. So again, jobs in pre-field, on-field, and post-field. I'm going to give you some of what I think are the best things in those. On the pre-field, the senders and the church, for the whole church to know that the team is going out. For the church to buy in that this isn't just a fragment of our population, or this isn't just, those crazy people, or there are all sorts of derogatory terms that we use to section off people of the church. Oh, it's just them. Here's the main church, and then they're over there. Missions, loving our neighbor as ourselves, making sure that others know that there is a God that created them, knows them, and loves them. That's the work of the church. And so for the whole church to know, and pre-field family and friends, the packing, the who's going to take care of the dog or the cat, or can someone come stay with the kids and make that plan. The on-field part for senders, churches, families, and friends. A lot of time, most of the work has been done in the pre-field, the fundraising, again, and in the pre-field, that it's not just the responsibility of those going on the team, but this is a mission of the whole church. So that everyone is involved with that. On-field, the senders need to be aware, looking for updates, prayer partners, praying for them specifically, meeting together to pray for them. And then on the post field, the senders, the churches, and family and friends need to be willing to welcome the team back and to listen patiently to all the stories about what God did. So often, and some of this has to do with youth ministry, but not all of it. So often, teams will have gone and done something, and they come back and they are so eager to share how they have seen God move. And especially if it's a person or a young person who was exploring their faith, and God has met them in incredible ways, and they're ready to come back, and they want to start a feeding ministry or a scholarship program or to go do more. And the church is kind of like, oh, that's nice. Yeah, great. But that's not in our 3-year plan, or that's not in our 5-year plan. So yeah, just nothing. It is, I have seen many a heart get crushed by the reaction of the senders when a team has come back. And that post field is, again, it's not just in this little box, it's out into perpetuity. And what an incredible opportunity churches have to welcome home their goers and to take that momentum and move it forward. Incredible opportunity. So those are some ideas for the MISTM grid in that first section. The goers pre-field and their team leaders, obviously they need to do all the prep that we have already talked about, of knowing where they're going, what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it. If they're going to a place where there's another language or another culture, to really study that. I've worked with teams that will assign kind of like research papers or current event articles, that everybody going has to bring in a current event or a historical moment from the place that they're going. And while that seems like that perhaps that's something to do while you are heading overseas, you can do the same thing with the other side of your town or another church in your town, or wherever it is that you're going to go serve them and serve with them, to dig into what is their reality like in that pre-field. The on-field is pretty obvious of that's what they do when they're on field. And then the post-field for the goers is so very, very important. Depending on time, we'll dig into that. But the short version is that there should be a difference between someone who's gotten to go and serve on short-term mission and someone who hasn't. There should be a difference in their lives of what they do, how they do it, how they spend their time and their energy, maybe their resources, maybe their finances. We call that fruit, based out of John 15. That comes from a model by Dr. Tim Dearborn and Dr. Lisa Espinelli Chen. Their names, I believe, are on your handouts. They have incredible material out there of how to help goers, both the leaders and the followers, the team members, to do their post field. And again, y'all, leadership is crucial. You have to have a leader. So often in the church, there's this concept of like, well, we're just kind of a flat organization. Like, I'm not any better. Like, who am I as opposed to anybody else? We are not asking for you to have a gold star by your name or to obviously think that you're better than someone else, but leadership is crucially important. As the team needs someone to go to ask questions and get answers. And on the host receiver side, we need someone to go to ask questions. And I've worked with teams that didn't have leaders, and it's generally a disaster. Anyway, okay, off my soapbox about that. Going on to the host receiver / ministry site and the agencies. The agencies pre-field, on-field, and post-field should be there to help guide you. Obviously, you don't have to go through an agency, especially locally. But then again, we generally do, right? Like so-and-so has a soup kitchen and we're going to go work with them. Or Center for Student Missions has a project in DC and we're going to go work with them. Or Education Equals Hope works in Costa Rica and in Ecuador and Rwanda and Kenya and Uganda and Madagascar and Haiti. How do we interface with them? So the agencies are really important Because the best way, and this is short-term specific, but the best way to do short-term ministry is through long-term partnership. The best way to do short-term ministry is through long-term partnership. So find somebody who's doing the type of work that you want to be doing long-term and partner with them in the short term. The agencies are carrying the relationships long-term, and God can merge you into that traffic for a season and do phenomenal things in you and through you. And then maybe you'll be merged off and to go into something else. But really, really important. And if you have any questions about that, please ask them in just a minute. But going above that dotted line, the host receivers / the ministry sites, they do a ton of work pre-field to be ready for a team. And I have seen that be the galvanizing agent that supports ministry in phenomenal ways. North Americans generally walk around with the attitude of like, I just don't want to be a bother. Like, I don't want to make it hard for anybody or be difficult or be a bother in any way. Like, no, we'll just do it. And so out of a sense of keeping a burden from somebody, they don't do all the communication or all the pre-field work that should be done. When really that pre-field work on a ministry site side is the gasoline in the engine to keep things moving. We have a project, we have a point and a purpose. We here in Ecuador, we work with about 17 different ministry sites around the country of Ecuador. 4 or 5 of them are Episcopal churches. The others are outside of the denomination. But watching them for 21 years, so I'm like, are you really telling me the truth? Is this really the truth? Are you really happy to be doing this work, or is this a bother? 21 years in, I can say with 100% authenticity that this sense of pride that they have something to do and a program and a project, and they're coming together for this. One of the reasons that this is so incredibly important is so often, it doesn't have to be, there is mission to middle class and upper class situations, and that has to do with more they're not living in the poverty of condition that generally people who are doing short-term mission want to go help and support. So you can work with upper class, and we could have a whole nother conversation about that. But the vast majority of missions is with people in desperate and difficult situations. Go Tar Heels. I heard that. So those churches, or in our case, Educational Hope students, we provide micro scholarships. 600 and some micro scholarships go out of our office a month to students in desperate and difficult situations. When you are born and raised in a desperate and difficult situation, in a poverty situation, you carry a sense of purposelessness, worthlessness. You are menos, you are less than. And it's part of the ethos that you were born into and raised into. Is it a true and accurate ethos? No, it is a lie from the pit of hell, in the fact that we are all equal in the body of Christ. We are known and loved by Jesus, by God equally. But the world and the poverty of our condition sends messages that we don't have anything of worth and value. And so when a ministry site in that pre-field time right here, when they have a project to work on, that in and of itself is poverty alleviation, and the raising up of the spirit and the worth and the dignity and the integrity of that community and population. I hope that makes sense. On field, they have a ton of work to do in hosting and moving community forward and leading prayer and worship together and creating safe space for the goers to be. And what the goers and the host receivers do on the on-field is these two quadrants are really mixed together. But then when we get to the post-field, the goers, the leaders, and the team members, they go back to their normal. They go back to sleeping in a comfortable bed and having hot water at their disposal, and may or may not ever think about not if they're going to eat again, but when they're going to eat again. And the host receiver ministry sites, they are living their own post field. And we have a desire and a responsibility as we enter into short-term missions to pour into each other on this post-field side, which is one of the reasons why it's so important for the sending church, the sending entity, to know how important the post-field is, not only for the hearts and the well-beings of their individuals, but for their whole church, for the team itself, and that ongoing relationship that continues to happen with the host receivers and the ministry sites themselves. I hope that makes sense. I hope that you take this grid. Why I put this in your packet is anytime that you are doing mission, anytime, any place, anywhere, really want you to dig into this and fill in each box. What is whose responsibility where? There is something called the Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Teams. You can Google that, and they have, I believe it's 9 standards, and part of it is Mistim Grid. It's much more than we can get into in an hour plenary. But that resource is out there, Standards of Excellence. And one of the things that they talk about is mutual design. In order for it to be an excellent mission, it has to have an aspect of mutual design, that it's not just, oh, we're going to go help those poor people, here we come. But there is relationship and commitment and community between the senders, the goers, and the host receivers to mutually design what is happening. I will take a moment to mention that everything that I've talked about is in person, right? It's you actually going. There was this little tiny detail. I don't know if you guys heard about a pandemic, or the COVID-19 pandemic. I think it was global, being facetious. That really kind of threw a lot of missions into chaos. Because how can you possibly do mission if you can't physically be, if you can't go, like Bishop Todd said this morning, if you can't go be where they are. And I was one of the chief naysayers when people started asking, hey, could we figure out how to do this virtually or on Zoom? No, that's ridiculous. It wasn't the first time that I was wrong. And it wasn't the first time that God was like, Cameron, we're going to need to talk about that. And the short version is that we were able to create a virtual model to this, and had 4 or 5 churches come through our virtual short-term mission program. And in fact, the Diocese of North Carolina, I think Stan Zerlinger and Jill Conrad, who are both in the audience, had a hand in writing the article that went out in the diocesan news bulletin. I don't know if you call it a newsletter, newspaper, news magazine, that thing that you guys do. It was awesome. I have several copies. But wrote about what it is to do short-term missions virtually. You would really need to go through an agency, because the best way to do long-term ministry is through short-term ministry is through long-term partnership. And so those agencies that host the long-term partnership, being able to create that connection over Zoom, and we did it. And it is amazing to see what God has done with that. People who would never be able to go on a short-term mission far afield, maybe their health, maybe finances, maybe security, all sorts of reasons that they're like, I don't feel like I can do that. I can't get on an airplane anymore. They could sit on their couch in their living room, and we're a part of short-term mission through the miracle of Zoom. And we brought 20 people from the Chapel of the Cross and 20 people from a church here called Cristo Liberador, an Episcopal church here in Quito, Ecuador, and have kept up those relationships. But in that, we took a week, and it was 2 hours a night for 5 days, and really went long and deep, which is phenomenal. I had no idea that it could happen through Zoom, but we saw the model work and replicated it several times. So just a little shout out about that. I'm going to let you guys know that there are 2 other resources. Again, the 5 F's. This is by Dr. Tim Dearborn and Lisa Espinelli Chin. If you were to ever come on a short-term team with Education Equals Hope, we spend a lot of time digging into this because this is the post field for the goers, but it's also post field for the senders. And we do the same thing, but in a different way for the host receivers post field. But the 5 F's are the 5 stages that people tend to go through when they return home from a short-term mission. Looking at our clock, I'm going to give you just the titles and give you some teasers and let you dig into it yourselves. But the first F of after, I'm going to back up to make sure that everyone knows that we are talking about this square particularly. This square, can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Okay. This square particularly, and this square, the post field is after the short-term mission. So the 5 F's are the stages people tend to go through. The first one is fun. It's fun to be home. You're not on high alert anymore. The second is flee. You tend to flee from your home culture. Sometimes your home church. This is where teams come back and they're so excited and they're looking for people to receive them and to hear what God has done. But the church is pretty busy and they still got all the programs that they had before you left. And we've already made our 3-year or 5-year plan and we can't. And I sound like I'm giving churches a really hard time. I'm not. It's the reality of the culture that we live in. But that causes people on short-term teams to flee. They don't want to re-engage with their home culture. And then they turn to fight. Fun, flee, the third one's fight. And particularly love this picture for it because these kittens, they're just tossing around and they're not actually going to do a whole lot. And that's the fight stage. It's generally misplaced passion. We want to do something, but we don't know what to do. And we don't always have the vehicle by which to do it back in our home culture. And we get angry and we fight. And then we get tired and then we just fit back in and we're just done. It's not fun to be home. Too tired to fight. You can't flee the whole time. You have to re-engage. So you just fit. And it's as though short-term mission never happened. And if you stop there, it's 5 F's, not 4. If you stop there, that is an aborted process. And that's where more harm than good can be done for the goer because they get taught the message that it doesn't matter what I do. I can't change the world around me. And that's not actually true. The 5th F is fruit. And again, that comes out of John 15. If you have gone on short-term mission with Educational Hope or with me, could you guys raise your hands real quick? So that other people in the room know that you are a resource to talk to about these 5 F's. Hi guys. Jesus came and interned with us this summer. Yay. Hi guys. Fruit could be all sorts of things from food pantries to service projects to worship to relationships and community, holding each other's hearts. Fruit is the goal, again, out of John 15, that we would be known as Jesus's disciples by the fruit that we bear. And we should have fruit in our lives after taking time to serve and do missions. That is part of the ethos of how our faith works, as when we are focused on others, when we are focused on God, we grow. There's so much to say. That'd be another whole workshop. And then just really encourage you, when you go into missions, that you die to these 4 things, that you die to your intellectual prejudice and to your cultural prejudice and to your spiritual prejudice and your self-seeking ambition. Because you have to be willing to fully believe in the pit of your stomach that you are no more and no less than anybody else around you, and all the trappings that we put around ourselves intellectually, culturally, spiritually, that we use to help define ourselves don't actually define us. And we have to be very careful walking into missions with these prejudices, because we can do a lot of harm instead of good. I would love to invite you to come to Ecuador. We do a lot of training in the middle of our short-term missions. We spend a lot of time explaining more about all of these concepts when you come to do short-term mission with us. We have a vision team scheduled for February 1st to the 6th. So if this has piqued your interest, if there's one person, if you want to come by yourself, if you have 2 or 3 people that want to come together, a vision team through Education Equals Hope pulls together interested people from all over, and we'll form a team, and we'll give you pre-field work to do before you come, but not overwhelming, so that you can come be a part of something like this and learn more about missions, so that wherever God is calling you to work, in your town, in the next town over, in North Carolina, further afield, that you are more equipped to do so. So at this point, I would love to take the time for questions, and maybe answers, but at least the questions. Yeah, is that... What a fantastic question. And how much time do you have? Yes, you cannot have an authentic relationship with someone you are always trying to get something from, which is why Jesus died on the cross, because God gave us everything so that we could be an authentic relationship. So that is kind of our goal and model. There are 3 types of poverty. And North Americans are very good at seeing poverty of condition, which is the physical poverty of lack of food, medicine, house, clothing, education, that physical poverty. But there's also poverty of being, which North Americans struggle with as much as anybody, because our identity is wrapped up in things besides being a son or a daughter of the living God. And there's poverty of responsibility, and that's when we usurp someone else's responsibility. We are all responsible for ourselves, for caring for ourselves and others. And there are many systems in the United States that are set up that take other people's responsibility from them. So to enter into a mutual or a reciprocal relationship when one party has deemed that the other party is needy, first of all, we need to understand that we all have need. But secondly, you have to form the relationship in order to be invited in to help address the situation. So if you see somebody like, oh, wow, this community has substandard housing and we need to work on their housing, we're going to create a team of people to go build houses for them. Well, if you don't have relationship in the community, how do you know that that's actually what they need? You don't. You're making that assumption from your point of view. So that's where the agencies that are there long term are so helpful and viable, because, hey, we'd like to come build houses. And then the agency who has the long-term relationship, we've been working in this neighborhood for 10 years. And when we got here, that was something that we noticed. But really what the community wants to work on is clean water. And so we're working towards clean water as opposed to housing. Housing will come eventually. There is something called asset-based community development, ABCD, asset-based community development. And that is starting with, what does the community want? And even though it might not make logical sense to an outsider, it is trusting the wisdom of that community. And as North Americans, this is really challenging, because we really want to be right, and we want to be logical, and we want to be efficient. Let's do this the most efficient way possible. But relationships aren't efficient. Maybe AI is. We can go down that rabbit hole, but human relationship is more important and is more life-giving than efficiency. And so how to take that to your missions committee? Well, but it is the foundation and the base. And we have to start with understanding that we can't come in and tell anybody what they need. We need to come in on a level playing field, believe that we are all equal, but not only believe it, but like really believe it. And then out of relationship, wait to be invited in. It's like, if any of you have ever gone on a date in your life, I can imagine that you would chuckle with me at the idea of sitting down on a first date or a blind date and having the person across the table being like, you know what your problem is? Your problem is those glasses look really funny on you, and that's actually not a good color for you, and you should drink more water. And if they start picking at everything, they don't even know you, is that date going to go very well? So relationship is the place to start.